People go for funny drinks and down them by the pail, like coffee, cocoa, tea and milk, and even Adam's ale. For my part, they can keep the lot. I never would complain. I wouldn't touch the blooming stuff. I only drink champagne. For champagne, Charlie is my name. Champagne drinking is my game. There's no drink as good as fizz, fizz, fizz. I'll drink every drop there is. All round town it is the same. I pop, 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 I roast the pain. I'm the idol of the barmaids, and Champagne Charlie is my name. Champagne Charlie is my name. Champagne drinking is my name. There's no drink as good as fizz. I'll drink every drop of it. All round town it is the same. I pop, pop, sing, madam, sing. I'm the idol of the barmaids, and Champagne Charlie is my name.
How are you, all right? If it's laughter you're after, Trinder's the name. You lucky people. You know, anybody that recognises me today, they give their age away. Because I have to tell you, I went into show business on the 5th of June, 1921. It's a long time, isn't it? You know, I've discovered there's three ages of man. The young man, the middle-aged, and my God, you're looking well. But you know, one thing I'm so happy about, when I went onto the stage, in spite of the fact that my mother and father, they knew nothing about the theatre, that was the greatest choice a man ever made, because I've had a wonderful life. I've been everywhere. I've seen lots and lots of things the normal person hasn't seen. And the most satisfying thing is, I've met some wonderful people. People that have just been names. I've met them, known them intimately, and discovered that there's some wonderful people in show business. One of the most gratifying things is that do you know there's no racialism in show business? We've had all the black stars who've been as big and as important to the public, not to the other pros. They've just been brother and sister artists. There's no anti-racialism. I've never met any anti-Semitism in show business. Everybody's taken for what they are, which is wonderful. You get people with a very lowly upbringing and become almost millionaires. Some of them are wise, look after it. Some of them are not so wise. And those are the people that we have to look after when later on in life they're not capable of looking after themselves. But among the names that spring to me, and I could almost be an encyclopedia, I could go through a theatrical telephone directory and give you the life story of everybody. But some of the wonderful characters, and among them was one act that is international. Wilson, Keppel and Betty. They were Egyptian sand. They weren't Egyptian because Joe Keppel, he was as Irish as Blarney Stone. Jack Wilson, you never saw him, but he didn't have a cigarette in the corner of his mouth. And they wore out about 8 Bettys. The last Betty was Patsy, and her mother was a Betty before her. Now, Betty Knox, she was with the boys for years. She was a journalist, and she left the act so that she could work and do a daily column in the Evening Standard. And she used to do a column called Last Night in London. Then she left the Evening Standard and she went with Harper's Bazaar. Now, Joe Keppel, he was a real character. They were playing the London Coliseum, and Joe went out between the houses and they never saw him for a week. They didn't know where he was. He was in hospital having an operation. The doctor had phoned him and said the bed was available, and he went to the German hospital in Dalston, had the operation and came back as though nothing had happened and said, oh, well, is everything all right? Now, he had a peculiar little habit. Whenever he met you, passed you in the street, never raised his hat or waved, but he used to go. And we were doing a show at the London Palladium. We had a pair of Adagio dancers. They were called the Zoris. The man was dressed like Tarzan and the girl was dressed like a leopard. And she used to dive from a pedestal off stage down into his arms as though she was attacking him. Now, they couldn't speak a word of English. It was just after the war, and they were one of the first German acts I remember coming over here after war. And I passed him in the passage one afternoon. I knew that he couldn't speak a word of English, and I just smiled and said, "How do?" And he went. He'd been mixed in with Joe Keppel. Another thing, in the show, we had a donkey, and this donkey used to walk on and do a thing. And Joe used to feed him, used to give him carrots and sweets and anything was going. Finally, we had to bar Joe Keppel off the side of the stage because the donkey wouldn't work if Joe was anywhere in sight, and he had to be shut away during the time this donkey was on. There was no room for Joe and the donkey. Now, I went to America with them. Well, we went over together. I was going to New York, and Wilson, Keppel and Betty were off to Las Vegas. Now, when they'd finished their sand dancing, they had a mat, and they used to sprinkle the sand on, and it had to be sharp sand to make the noise effect. And Joe used to always sweep it up. It was then put in a bag, ready for the next performance. We get on the Queen Elizabeth, on our way to America, we get to New York. As we get off, we've got to go through the customs. Now, the customs officers, particularly with theatrical baggage, are examining everything. And they came to this bag. Said to the two boys, "What have you got in here?" They said, "Sand." "What?" I said, "Sand." He said, "Well, where are you going?" He said, "Las Vegas. There's hundreds of square miles in Las Vegas of sand. And Wilson, Keppel and Betty are taking a bag of sand." That's where they must have got the phrase from, taking coals to Newcastle. But the customs in New York sifted every ounce of that sand, thought they were smuggling something. And I said to them afterwards, "Next time I come to America, you're two people I'm not coming with," because I waited for them. Took me hours to get through. But another thing with Joe, they lived in, was like a professional boarding house in the West End of London. It was called Olivelli's in Store Street off Tottenham Court Road. And we used to all meet in there at night. We had a sort of communal supper. All the gags in the world were going. And Jack Wilson got a dish with Indian ink, and he put his feet in the Indian ink, and when you walked in, there were bare feet marks right up the wall, across the ceiling, and down the other side. And it was Joe on tables. They were putting tables, and he's laying on his back, he's putting his feet in the Indian ink and sticking it on the ceiling. And as you walked in, you saw these bare feet marks right up the wall, across the other side, and down the other side. And it took Joe about 3 months to get the Indian ink off his feet. Goodness only knows what would have happened to him if he'd had an accident and they'd taken his shoes and socks off. They'd have thought, well, what the devil's this? Who has Indian ink on their feet? But these were the characters of showbiz. And there were so many characters. Everybody on a bill was a character. Crazy Gang. That's almost, there's not enough film in the British film industry to talk about the Crazy Gang. There were 6 comedians, and they were the highest paid comics in the business at that time, and they were such great pals. They all lived in the same area. And Charlie Norton, he was a funny man, but he was a lovable sort of man. And you used to get Charlie. He was the best at the double talk I ever knew. He'd be able to get in a party and he'd speak to some very elegant Duchess-type lady and he'd say, "Well, it's coming on the side, you see." And he'd gradually going lower and I'd say, "Well, it's right." I said, "Oh, God, good to the man, look. And now he was Scottish and he had a lisp. Now, take either one thing or the other, it's bad enough to understand, but with the combination of the two, you can never understand Charlie. And I've seen him getting elegant women in evening dress kneeling on the floor listening to him. Well, the boys used to try and get Charlie a bit drunk, and eventually Charlie wasn't well. Now, you never see little Charlie Norton without a cigar in his mouth, his bowler hat on. So he wasn't too well, and the theatre doctor at the Palladium, who was a Harley Street consultant, very friendly with all the boys, so they said, look, tell Charlie he mustn't smoke a cigar, only a pipe. He mustn't drink, and he's got to be in bed by 12 o'clock. So the first night this happens, Charlie, who lived in a house in Streatham, goes home, and he's in bed by 12 and he can't sleep. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, he suddenly decides, oh, I've had enough of this. So he gets up, and he's walking down the street for a walk, and a policeman comes along and said, hello, Mr. Norton, come on, you're going the wrong way. Turned him round and started walking him back, and he's trying to say, no, he's always well away this time. And he took him right home, opened the gate, put him in and shut the gate, and there's Charlie fuming, swearing the place down. And Charlie Norton's granddaughter, she was the figure skating champion of Europe. Her father was Red Stapleford, a Canadian ice hockey player, and he used to manage the Streatham Tigers. And his daughter used to get up with her mother, who was Charlie's daughter. And they used to get up 4 o'clock in the morning, and she used to go to the ice rink and practice. And she won the European Skating Championship. But of course, as I say, with that crowd, I could tell you stories forever and ever, but that's how it is. You know, it's hard to think when you've got this kaleidoscope of wonderful people. That's why I say I was lucky. I went into a business where I met wonderful people, even Americans, people like Sophie Tucker. What a charming woman Sophie Tucker was. And I went to America on one of the ships with her. Now, she used to be sitting up till 4 o'clock in the morning playing gin rummy. But you'd see her at 9 o'clock the next morning, elegant, marvellous. She'd only had about 3 or 4 hours sleep, and she was like a duchess, and they used to act that way. But really, I should make a list of these names. In fact, what I should do is get a telephone directory. And now, we had another wonderful man that comes to my mind. It's a strange thing how some people get remembered forever, for no reason at all, and others get forgotten. Now, of recent years, a very wonderful performer was Vic Oliver, but you very seldom hear about Vic Oliver these days, yet you hear about Max Miller. And one of the wittiest and funniest Cockney comedians was Charlie Austin. He used to play a policeman, Parker PC. And he was the first man in show business before Tom Walls who had a horse in the Derby. He had a horse called Parker PC, and it ran in the Derby. And when he went to Weatherby's to register his colours, they said, what colours do you want? He said, well, I want policeman blue and half-white sleeves. And they said, policeman blue, what's that? He said, ain't you ever seen a copper? Well, I want policeman blue, half-white sleeves, and if my horse gets in front, the jockey will put his hand up like that, and that will stop the lot of them. And well, it's not a sad note really, but when Harry Tate died, he was being buried at Streatham Vale Cemetery. It was the middle of winter, there was about a foot of snow on the ground, and Charles Coburn, the original singer of The Man Who Broke the Bank at Monte Carlo. Now, Charles Coburn's son was a diplomat. He was knighted, and Charles Coburn always wore a silk hat and a frock coat. And he's at the funeral of Harry Tate. And he's 90, about 91, 92. And they're just lowering Harry Tate's coffin into the grave. And old Charlie Coburn, who was standing next to Charlie Austin, went... and Charlie Austin looked at him and said, it's not much bleating use you going home, is it? There was a shocking row about that. But all was forgiven. And Charlie Austin... he lost £65,000 in 1 year racing. He had a horse in the Derby 1 year, and the following year he was warned off Newmarket Heath. And Charlie was like a father to me. He always used to say, if I catch you backing horse, I'll break your neck. And thanks to Charlie Austin, I never backed a horse in my life. I had no interest at all in racing. In the same way as I don't drink. Don't take any notes of that, I just don't like it. But the greatest drunk comedian we had, I think, was Jimmy James. And Jim was a strict teetotaler. If Jimmy James and I were ever on a bill together, we'd have a party. A quarter of a pound of wine gums, and we were stinking. Now, you know, it's a strange thing. People see this little badge of mine glittering in the light sometimes. They wonder what it is. Well, it happens to be a rat. Strange thing to carry in a lapel of a jacket, but some of the greatest names in the world have been very proud to wear that, including Charlie Chaplin, Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy, and of course all the British stars like Will Hay, Rob Wilton, Talbot O'Farrell. And it's really a social organisation. Started nearly 100 years ago through charity. Now, up at the Empire Sunderland, the man who built the theatre, it was opened by Vesta Tilley, the man who built it and opened it was a man called Richard Thornton. Now, he afterwards amalgamated with Moss's. It became the Moss and Thornton Tour. Now, apart from being an impresario in the theatre, he was also a promoter of boxing matches. He managed boxers, and he ran trotting ponies. That was quite fashionable in those days, because tradespeople, like the grocer, the baker, they all had their delivery ponies and their little carts. And Richard Thornton had a very wonderful trotting pony called the Magpie. Joe Elvin, a Cockney comedian, was up there at that time, also interested in various sporting things, and he got Richard Thornton to lease him this pony called the Magpie. He brought it to London, and every Sunday morning, all the stars of the day, the male stars, used to meet, and they used to challenge the local tradespeople to races on a straight mile of the Croydon Road. Now, they trained it rather like a man trains performing animals, wouldn't let it eat on Sunday morning when they ran, until after the race they would feed it. So that was an incentive for it to run. Now, they used to back it, and every week used to win, and the money they won, they gave to charity. They started theatrical charities. There was people like Fred Russell, the ventriloquist, whose real name was Parnell, but that was a bad name as far as Ireland was concerned, so he changed his name to Russell. But he had 3 sons. They all did very well in show business, including Val Parnell, who latterly ran the Palladium, and there was Russell Carr, was another son of his, a ventriloquist. Now, they've won so much money and run out of challengers at the finish, so one day they didn't groom the pony. Joe Elvin was driving it home, and he was going past Kennington, the Horns at Kennington, a very well-known pub, which the pros used to use, and there, soaked with rain, looking so dishevelled, was the trotting pony. And an old cab driver came driving along with his horse, looked down, recognised Joe Elvin and said, "What have you got there, Joe?" He said, "It's a trotting pony." I said, "A trotting pony? Looks more like a water rat." And this gave them an idea. They changed its name from Magpie to Water Rat. Now, this went on for quite a long time until eventually they lost the pony and it died. And so they used to still meet Sunday mornings, and they called themselves the Select Order of Water Rats. After a while, they changed the name and they called it the Grand Order of Water Rats. Now, this was copied in America. They had the Lambs Club there. Now, this went on, and most of the big stars who went finally to America, like Charlie Chaplin and Stan Laurel, it was their great ambition to become water rats. And they were both made, well, with Stan Laurel, of course, naturally we made Oliver Hardy as well. And I think the greatest meeting I ever saw at the Water Rats on a Sunday was the day that Charlie Chaplin was made a water rat. It's still running, it's still very successful and raises a lot of money for theatrical charities. So I'm very proud to wear this one. Now, my water rat was left to me by a great pal of mine in his will, Monsieur Eddie Gray, of the Crazy Gang. Always used to call me Governor, and I always used to call him Genius. If we hadn't seen each other for 3 or 4 months, I'd phone him up, and he'd say, "Hello, Governor, what do you want?" I used to say, "Well, look, Genius, I want so-and-so." Now, if I was doing a show, Eddie was always with me. He was the court jester. He used to make me laugh. He had a sense of humour that was different to anybody else I ever met. And he used to say, "Governor, you're in me will." So if I was running a show and I wanted to get the first house out because it was raining hard and I wanted to get the queue in, I'd say, "Eddie, it's pouring with rain. I want to get the first house. Don't mess about. I want you to cut a bit." "What, cut my talents? I'll cut you out of my will." And sure enough, when he died, in his will, he'd left me his water rat's badge. And that I wouldn't part with for anything in the world.
Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I love London so. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I think of her wherever I go. I get a funny feeling inside of me just walking up and down. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I love London town. Funny people has cockneys, even got a language of their own. We call it Matheson slang, that's rhyming slang. If a cockney says, "Let's have a ball down the Frog and go into Rubber Dub," he means, "Let's have a walk, a ball and jog, down the Frog and Toad the Road, into the pub." I took some mates of mine into a pub. I said to the first one, "What are you going to have?" He said, "I'll have a beer and lint and a supersonic." That was a gin and tonic. I said the other one, "What about you?" He said, "I'll have a pepper and blotch and a front loader, scotch and soda." I had a Fizzy of myself, that's a beer. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I love London so. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I think of her wherever I go. I get a funny feeling inside of me just walking up and down. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I love London town. Get off me banner that I love London town.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this, but wait a minute, you've still got more to come. I know you're going to thoroughly enjoy this that follows. That's David Trigg's wonderful world of music hall, something I've been steeped in. You're going to see excerpts of such great people like Lily Morris, Gracie Fields, Wilson Keppel and Betty. There's no more I can say about people like that, can I? They're going to live for all times. This is what my wife calls playing Junos and Jevers. Do you know what happened to so-and-so? Do you ever see anything of so-and-so? I've had a great life, but I've got a lot more to go. Well, sit by, enjoy yourselves. I'm going. You lucky people. Cheerio. Next impression, racehorse.